Hi there, and welcome. Today we are. This is our first episode of Inside Conversations, and we're going to be talking to Shawnee Delaney, who you see here sharing the screen with me. She's had a esteemed career both in government as well as in the private sector, and today she is the CEO of the Vaillance Group. And we are delighted to have her here. My name is Christopher Burgess, and I'm the host for Inside Conversations, where the insider risk meets counterintelligence. And that's our topic today. So, Shawnee, welcome.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here. It's lovely to work with you.
My pleasure. So let's just jump right into it. If folks want to know more about you, we're on LinkedIn, so they can look at your LinkedIn profile. It's all right there. Yep. So tell us about life in the trenches of insider risk, insider threat teams, and the opportunities for individuals in this area of expertise.
So I think first, the most important thing is if anyone is curious, this is the line of work for you. And that's because every single case is different. Every investigation is different. It is, and this might make me sound very weird to say, but it is just such a cool occupation. You have people with experiences, intelligence, law enforcement, human resources, legal, privacy legal also, all kinds of cyber investigations, digital forensics, military, academics, right? Psychology, kind of the world is your oyster. And what's cool about this realm, if you will, is that these cases touch all of these different arenas. And so you can from any of those different directions and jump right in.
Well, it's kind of like the world of intelligence, where a lot of folks think intelligence is just the case officer on the street. But you've got HR, you've got forensics and cyber, you've got legal, you've got counselors, you've got investigators, you've got data scientists. And then there's this new career track that's being promoted by our government in the US here, the counter insider career track. Yes. So what do you make of that?
Well, what's in a name, right? I will say personally, it's not my favorite name, but I think if you talk to anybody who's actually a practitioner in this industry, everyone is going to agree that they don't like one name or another. Some people hate insider threat. Some people hate counter insider. Some people hate insider trust. I always tell people, I don't care what you call it. Just call it something and just have a program.
Well, that's great. My own experience has been when folks say, "Well, it's got to be, you can't trust your employee," and I'm saying, "Well, we're talking about a career path that requires a great deal of trust."
Yes.
And would you say that trust is the quotient that's most necessary for someone that goes into this career path? Credibility, trust, what else?
Yeah, I think credibility and trust obviously are very important because you're dealing with such sensitive cases. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people don't recognize that when we talk about insider threat, it can touch into suicidal ideation. It can touch into workplace violence. I've had cases where people who were suicidal kind of dragged colleagues in and then started threatening them when they reported them because they were concerned. So they created additional insiders. And then you've got HIPAA and things like that. So I really, like I said earlier, I think trust, curiosity, teamwork, people who are very, very good at collaboration and networking, because you're going to be working with people from every department in your organization, and you have to be able to build relationships.
So how do we help folks understand that this critical thinking needs to be without bias and 360 in nature?
Yeah, I mean, it won't work if you don't have that. When you're talking about either standing up a program or doing an investigation or doing training and awareness, any of those have to be holistic, because what we're talking about is not necessarily a cyber issue, solo cyber. We are talking about humans who sometimes use cyber means. And so with that, every person's different. People have motivations and vulnerabilities that change over time. You know this, Christopher, as well as I do. For those who are, who don't know either of us, we were both former case officers. We recruited people to spy. So we know that having people who maybe hit rock bottom, or they have a sick kid, or, they need money for something. It's not about the money, it's what they need that money for. So looking at all those pieces, you could destroy someone's life if you're not, really savvy and doing those investigations correctly.
I like to say you could create a threat where none existed prior.
I've seen it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to my next area, which is how does one prepare for the career path? Critical thinking, experiences. What areas of professional career paths can easily transfer over and be part of it? We talked about the HR, the counselors, investigators. From my perspective, it seems like whatever you're doing, there's a place for you. But I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, in fact, I mentor a lot of people trying to get into this space, and I ask them, what are you good at? What are you passionate about? Whatever they tell me, I can find a niche for them in insider threat. If someone doesn't really, if they're just starting, I would say look into psychology, look into investigations. If you're interested in that cyber angle, go into digital forensics. There really are so much. Privacy legal is another big one. And when we're talking insider threat, most of you on this probably understand that there are tools. It's a human thing. There's a cyber piece, but having tools really will help your program be able to respond proactively to a lot of these cases. So there's a lot of nuances within all of those areas where we need expertise. And the cool thing also is there is so much job security. Humans are humans. We're all going to make mistakes. So you're going to have mostly unintentional cases. But there's so much out there, and so many companies now recognize that they need a program and they need to look at this seriously. And so Google it right now, you'll find all kinds of openings.
Well, that's interesting you said that, because at a recent Insider Threat Summit, a speaker got up and spoke to how when the budget got tight, that they were let go, and with that, the entire insider program at a large corporation went out the door with it.
Yeah.
And so it made me think, was it this person didn't play well with others and we're going to reconstitute this by the company? Or because historically, when budgets get tight, everyone looks for something to prune. So how do you prove your value with an insider threat program? Because you're always trying to prove the positive.
Yes.
Which is, we've hired bad people. Oh my goodness. Well, Sam Walton used to say, talking about Walmart, you ever seen a city of 90,000 people that didn't have a jail? And so there's always going to be people who will break trust.
Right.
Those are our insiders, but we try to hire so not to have them walking through the door at the get-go. So tell me about the career paths that lend it. Law enforcement, Intel. Clearly, you and I both had the Intel background. You also had the military. I see space for academia.
Yep, 100%. Honestly, the world is your oyster. I think you could pull from any area. One thing that I think this enterprise, this program lacks is a actual career program, a university degree, something where you are pulling in the cyber security angle, the human security, the investigations, the intelligence, the psychology. Any school would be brilliant if they came up with that. I'm trying to push for it actually right now. But that way people would have kind of more of a one-stop shop to go bring their expertise, check those boxes, learn all of those pieces of what a program is, and then go forth and conquer.
Texas A&M stood up the Bush School of Intelligence.
Right.
And a lot of folks have gravitated there from the intelligence community. The military has their war colleges and officer colleges, of course, to promote the educational side to it. And then we have NSA, who's created these cyber centers of excellence throughout the United States at a great number of universities. So I take your point. There's a lot of avenues out there, but it does require a little digging.
Yeah. But what's interesting too is that if you look at industries that work with the government, defense contractors, anyone who has any contract with the government, there are regulations in place where they have to have insider threat programs. The problem is, in my opinion, is that private sector has lagged behind in recognizing, that kind of makes sense. Maybe that's needed. I can tell you, Christopher, a story where This is a couple years ago during the height of COVID. I was meeting with the head of security for a pharmaceutical company. And obviously they were looking at COVID and vaccinations, pretty important stuff for the whole world.
Sure.
And came from a government background. I really respected him. We had a lot in common. We were chatting and I brought up insider threat. And I will never forget when he said, we're not worried. We're just not worried anyone's going to hit us like a nation state. They're going to go after the big guys. And I almost fell out of my chair because you and I know firsthand that they're like shooting fish in a barrel. That target is so easy. They have no awareness. They think it can't happen to them. They have no insider threat program. I mean, it was beautiful.
My mantra for umpteen years has always been, you do not get to choose if you're the target.
Right.
Whoever is your adversary, be it a competitor, be it a criminal element, be it a nation state, they're the ones who are going to choose who the target is.
Right.
And we always, speaking from personal experience, you look for access and then you look for the vulnerabilities.
Right.
And so they're making book. Those in the government sector who have clearances and were active 2015 or before, you can remove all doubt. If your information was in OPM, it is also in China, right? And that included all of your background information where you splayed your life out and said, here are all my picadillos. Yep. And now they know them as well. And then if you look at the dossier they can build, and this is the area I think lots of folks self-select out, is they don't realize how a mosaic is put together. Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, in fact, it is so much fun. And I recognize this makes me sound super creepy when I admit that, but just think about social media. I know everyone talks about social media, but if I want to target someone and pick any topic, I can Google that topic on LinkedIn. I can find all the people that work in it. I can find most people post their clearances. Please don't do that, people. Erase that. I can find who they're connected to. I can start kind of just putting the pieces together. Go on Facebook. I can find out they love Guns N' Roses. Guess what? I love Guns N' Roses too. And that's how I can socially engineer a chance encounter, if you will, or even a cold call, which those were easy for me. You can see so much about a person. I would judge someone just on their photos if I think they would be nice or not.
So have you heard of the infamous Mr. Yu from Singapore, recruited by the Chinese to harvest LinkedIn?
Yeah.
And in his when he was interviewed, he said the algorithm, all I had to do was set up a complex query, and the algorithm every day gave me my juice. Yeah. That's all I needed. And I was in touch with numerous people about consulting opportunities, and the FBI, together with the Department of Justice, put out a video series that was largely based on that case. That's available for viewing by insider teams to share with their constituents. And this is one of the things when we talk about this, and counterintelligence, counterespionage, if you will, is the career paths that we're accustomed to when we speak of government. But security awareness is so much a part of that, yes. Right? Where we have counterintelligence, that was also, you penetrate the opposition so you know what they know, right? Or they penetrate you so they know what you know. Where counterespionage is more aligned to the insider investigations. We know our information is out there in the ether. How are we going to find it? Right. So perhaps you can talk about how should a corporation, set up a program where they not only make all their employees aware of the threat that exists, but also perhaps talk about how they can prepare their employees for how to respond.
Yes, great question. Really glad you asked that. So I'd like to describe, first of all, building an insider threat program or having any sort of security program. It's like you're building a house. I just did it. It's a lot of stress, but it's actually really fun in a weird way. Maybe I'm a masochist, but you need a foundation, right? To simplify. And having that training and awareness program, that's your foundation. if you do not have that, and you don't have everybody in your enterprise speaking the same language and understanding what red flags are and understanding where they should report and why they should report, what good cyber hygiene is, all of these really simple box ticks, you're not going to succeed, period. Another thing, Christopher, that I found is when organizations are standing up insider risk management programs, oftentimes they kind of do it only in name. They might have a program manager, sometimes lower level. They're lucky if they have a training and awareness team. But there are so many pieces. If you have to look at this like it is a hub, it's a central spoke within all of those teams that we talked about earlier. And that team has to be able to pull data from HR, from investigations, from cyber, from legal, and it has to be able to pass things back to them and basically manage these processes. Now, when you're talking about counterintelligence or counter-espionage, obviously that counter-espionage angle, that's very real. And I think a lot of organizations don't recognize that. So what I've been telling people lately is that if you're going to have a program, I highly, highly recommend that whoever is running that program is very high, a director at least, because people who don't have that clout or legitimacy, if you will, within the business, people are going to ignore them. And you need someone who can say, I need you to come to this meeting. And if you can't come, bring a proxy. You need someone that people are going to respect and listen to. It also has to, everyone says get buy-in from the C-suite. That's great. But I want C-suite to actually be a champion of it. I want them to talk about it and promote it and not just, like talk the talk. You have to walk the walk too. And I see a lot of that.
I hear you. I was at a company meeting in a company where the number 2 in the corporation said, if you're not thinking about security, I want you to start thinking about your job security. Now, that is an unambiguous message from the top going downhill. And when messages flow like water, they flow fast. And boy, that spread like wildfire across the corporation that, okay, we're all in this. It's not just that's their job, it's our job too. And so part of that, do we need to have chief risk officers? Do we have to have chief trust officers? Should the general counsel be the one who has the ultimate say on this? Because so many insider cases where we find somebody has been malevolent have a criminal angle to them. So you need somebody to reach out to law enforcement and say, this person broke the law. This person may have broken a lot more laws than we're aware of. You may have a better eye on what this person is doing than we do. And so you say we need a senior person. Is it throw it under the remit of the general counsel or throw it under the remit of the chief risk officer? What do you think?
So I think anything can go. You have to take into account what your culture is first. Every industry has kind of an overarching culture. And within that industry, every company has a very different culture. Not all soda makers have the same culture, for example. So taking that into consideration first and foremost for every piece that we're talking about. I don't care if it sits under general counsel. However, if you have a chief risk officer, which is starting to become a bit more popular, if you will, that's great. But make sure that chief risk officer title, they understand the human angle. Very often these programs sit under cybersecurity or IT, which is fine also, but you have to make sure that CISO or whoever's in charge of that org recognizes the human angle. It is not just cyber. And
my mother gave me a book in 7th grade that said how to lie with statistics. I mean, so data is data, right? We all know that data might be your starting point. Say, oh, wow, look at Joe here. He just did 20,000 queries to access data and he got 301 errors.
Right.
And maybe he's trying to swim outside his swim lane. We should go ask him.
Right.
As opposed to, look what Joe did here. He's trying to steal 20,000 documents. We've got a major case. And I've had that. Go talk to Joe. What are you doing? He goes, oh, my boss told me to grab everything that was in the database here because we're going to run a new tool against it, blah, 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 blah. Okay, thanks. And off we go. We verify it with the boss and you're done. Not everything appears as it is. It's kind of like our mirrors on our vehicles. Objects may be closer than they appear. And so it might be there. But you spoke to investigative support. So whoever's making the accusation probably should own the investigation. But then the entire corporation's got to kind of come behind them to provide them the data you spoke to provide them the counseling or the interpretation of the data. And you need analysts that can deal with disparate data, because you have your physical data, you have your videos of coming and goings, you have your digital data, and then you have the interviews with your colleagues. Right. And how often have we seen cases go to prosecution where the colleagues all had forewarning, but the colleagues said nothing? And you spoke to that just a moment ago, but I'd like you to reinforce that see something, say something isn't just terrorism.
No, it's not. It's a great tagline, and I think everyone should steal it. Don't quote me on that. But
I think we should. And I have many times.
Look, the bottom line is, like I referenced earlier, no matter what the act is, and we're talking mostly malicious is what we're really concerned with. That unintentional, we can train that away, right? So that's why you need that training and awareness.
One would hope.
Right?
Or we can move them along.
Right. But get out. But with that malicious, you're not going to train that away. Someone's still going to do what they planned on doing. However, the other people around them might now be trained to notice those changes in a pattern of behavior and report that. So having confidential reporting is so critical. I have been personally in instances where I had to report people, and it was terrifying because the fear of retaliation is real. You can have a no retaliation policy and it doesn't mean anything, because people will still retaliate. So you have to do this thoughtfully. And that's all part of the awareness campaign. This is why we're trying to highlight anybody who has anomalous behavior. Here's another example. I talked about suicide ideation. There was a case I worked where there was an office move and somebody had left behind in a desk drawer, like in the very, very back, like a little black journal. And when the woman moved into the desk, she found it, she was reading it, and it had all kinds of suicide ideation and self-harm and just really, really bad things. So she turned it in, and luckily we were able to figure out, who's it belonged to and get him help. We intervened right away. He had help, and he was, after a while, fine, came back to work, and he was okay. Now imagine if that person hadn't thought to turn that in. Mm-hmm. So many people are afraid of saying no or being a narc or tattling on someone. We have to change that culture so that people are comfortable, because they could be saving a life or lives nowadays.
Well, I want to take a small break here and invite our audience, who is from all four corners of the world, even though I'm not a flat earther, and to put questions in the chat box, and we're going to have time at the end to get to them. But I want to welcome everyone to give us something to think about in their chats. Let's move on to you're the target. I think it's important that we talk about why you have what you have is of value, and it depends on who's targeting you. So I like to put it into four categories, and I'd like you to speak to each of them. Okay. We have the individual themselves, Snowden, right? Example. We have competitors. We know of competitors hire people away, bring your IP with you. There was a case in 2010. Hilton hired the folks from another group. They brought over their idea for a great new model, and DOJ got involved. You were involved in one, competitors, where you got to clean up after it. Let me put it that way, which is where the gentleman from Waymo took all the IP and brought it over to Uber, where you were. And he got himself prosecuted as well. And pardoned, yes. And unfortunately, I think Uber was as big a victim as Waymo in this one.
It damaged reputation incredibly.
Yeah. And $245 million of somebody's equity to give to somebody as recompense for stealing their IP, which you didn't steal, but you hired somebody who did. So you've got the competitor angle, and then the criminals. The criminals are always touching your insiders, and than the nation states. And I
Yeah.
think we should spend a little bit on the nation state as well. So could you speak to those four, please?
Yeah. So nation state, I think, is the one that organizations most often think it can't happen to me. Why would a nation state come after my people? Sally the admin or Bob the janitor. Everybody knows something. And what I tell people working in companies is, if you are taking notes, if you're writing an email, whatever it is that you touch, if that information could help a competitor, think of it that simply, that's a trade secret. That's something we don't want that competitor to have, right? So next time you're at your desk and you're doing your work, start thinking, if someone got access to this, could this harm my organization, right? Insiders is the scariest, I think, because they can really do the most damage. They've got the natural access. They can move around systems. They know all your security protocols and your policies and how to get around them.
Well, a perfect example was Jonathan Tobey, the nuclear scientist.
Yeah.
And in his in the court records, that he sent to the Brazilians, he said, "I have received insider training, so I am working outside the parameters of what they're looking at." I mean, so he absolutely said, not only was I trained in this, but I figured out how to work around it. And he did.
Yes.
And he successfully did.
Yes.
And it wasn't until he was on the execution end of his espionage that he finally got caught.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to point out something here too. Derek pointed out that a problem is when senior stakeholders can't identify what their crown jewels are. I cannot tell you how many investigations I've had where someone has blatantly stolen intellectual property or trade secrets. I've gone back to the business and said, what is this worth? Because we're going to prosecute, we're going after them. And the business owner cannot tell me what it's worth. And that's real or potential. And that is incredibly frustrating, because in order to get the FBI or local law enforcement to prosecute and go after them, you have to prove you protected it. You have to prove, how was there data classification? Was it held secret? Did everybody have knowledge of it? But what is it worth? So please, people who have crown jewels or any trade secrets, know what that value is, know where it's held, know who has access, and if they should have access.
Let me add, and kind of talk to your people about when they do presentations, not to include it.
Yeah.
Because once it's out there, it's out there, and you lose that trade secret cover.
Yeah.
If somebody puts it in their LinkedIn profile, if somebody goes to a conference, even if it's only 15 people sitting in the audience,
Really true.
Exposure is exposure. Let's talk about the holistic footprint and speak to the governmental clients now. Mandated programs, the National Industrial Security Program, the folks there mandate insider threat must be present, have for years.
Yes.
Same thing with the Director of Central Intelligence Directives. We have the companies that want to interact with government have to go through hoops to do so. Having a program that looks for the internal leakage of information or the internal vulnerability of information is prominent. How do you train your personnel to be compliant without turning them all into, super sleuths, where they're always looking for somebody doing something bad? Because who wants to work in an environment where there's so much distrust?
Nobody. I mean, we've worked for the government. We know how that is. It all comes down to tone. So when you're doing your training and awareness, and when you're standing up your insider risk management program, you need to make sure that this program is transparent. You need to introduce it to the company. It shouldn't be rolled out in private. You want people to know that you are a central location where if they have questions or concerns, they can come to you. You want to be that trusted friend. You have something to tell, come, talk to me. I'll listen. So the tone of that training shouldn't be, we're always watching you or do this because we say. The tone of that training should be, hey, we care about you and your families. Hostile cyber acts and malicious actors are targeting all of us. We are all insiders. In fact, in one org, I wanted to get T-shirts made that says, I am an insider. And then just really hit home, like, Share this with your friends and your family. Share this with your kids and your parents because they're the worst. Make sure that everyone at home builds that good cyber muscle memory, if you will, because then they'll take it back to work.
Well, precisely, precisely. The front end is as important as the back end, is where I see it, where we tend to spend a lot of money on recruiting,
Mm-hmm.
and then the onboarding. I got to tell you, the first day is not when you give the security briefing that's going to last their career, because that person's interested in their W-9. They're interested in what are my benefits, and am I going to get paid? Or do you have my bank information?
Right.
So that this part of the exchange is going to be there. But if you do include security, then you better follow it up in 90 days.
Yes.
And from my viewpoint, correct me if I'm wrong, it's got to be dynamic. The once and done companies and are, they're existing on hope and prayer.
Yeah, I beg, no PowerPoints and no once and that's it. There are companies out there who do really incredible training. I know a lot of them. Hit me up if you want suggestions. But there are people who do escape rooms and they gamify it. And there's just a million different options out there. You can do micro learning where it's like 2 minutes, 3 minutes. You do that once a month and you're keeping it fresh in people's minds. Like, hey, here's this interesting fraud case about a nun who's, stole $835,000 from a Catholic college where she worked. To fund her gambling habit.
We made videos internally using employees. You're the target, or the inadvertent disclosure where, individuals breached the trade secret barrier, and it was accidental.
Mm-hmm.
The profession has, as you started with, it's a lot of fun. And you're not weird in that regard, because there's a lot of people who have a lot of fun in their work, and it becomes less like work when you enjoy it. I always viewed it as I was there to protect people from being wrongly accused and to put the hammer on those individuals who deserved it.
Yeah.
So could you speak a little bit about the malevolent investigation as compared to the compassionate investigation? Because I've seen companies use the 3 strikes you're out. Well, that's going to inspire folks. And I've seen other ones of, hey, perhaps you're overworked. Perhaps we have to look at the distribution here. Perhaps. I'm not saying excuse away behavior. And then we have those where data tells a story that isn't the story.
Yeah, and they think that's it.
Yeah.
So what you're touching on is employee lifecycle management. Ultimately, you talked
Let's
about
talk to it.
Yeah, you talked about recruiting, making sure you're hiring the right people. And by doing that, you make sure you advertise what the true job responsibilities are. Be honest, be upfront. Making sure that they understand and accept what your culture is. You have to talk about that in the interviews before you even hire them. I would suggest doing a background investigation before you give them a job offer. I can't tell you how many times there have been people that were hired, worked 6 months, and then they're like, oh, the background came back, they're really bad. So that's the beginning. That middle, what you're talking about, that training and the investigations, you have to be thoughtful. People need to have wellness programs. I don't mean you have to have massages every Friday, which if you do, call me. But you absolutely need to take care of your people and make them feel valued. The fastest way to start grooming and growing insider threats is to treat people poorly. And right now, people can go anywhere. They have hybrid options, work from home options. There's a lot of caregivers. I'm a single caregiver. And so you have to make sure that you are just taking care of your people and valuing them and making them feel valued. And here's a great example. We were talking earlier about, buy-in from the top. Here's the opposite. So there was a CEO of a major company who said in a room full of people, and of course this spread like wildfire out of the meeting, that we don't have any intellectual property to protect. I'm not concerned about it. Well, morale was then dead. It was killed. People in the security team, people in teams that worked on intellectual property, they were dead. They thought, well, why are we even here? What are we trying to protect? So making sure that you continue that wellness and you are supporting people, you are advocating for their, job career development, not just with what they're doing at your company, but what do you want to do when you grow up kind of thing? Like, how can we help you achieve your dreams? Those are employees that stay. When you do the opposite, that's when you create a trigger. And a lot of times it's that termination phase when someone is either being fired or they're quitting, where something triggers them. and they just snap. No one wakes up and they're like, I'm going to plant a logic bomb. Like there is something building up.
You just hit on a very important point that I wanted to make sure we brought up. We talk about the hiring, we talk about the training, we talk about the career life cycle, but how many companies actually have an exit program for when every employee leaves so that they can get an attestation from their employee that they've returned all intellectual property and none is retained, that they've returned all devices, that you get to discuss their behavior for the last 90, 120 days because your forensic team went and grabbed it for you. And so if there's any anomalies there, I mean, every report from those in the industry say to us that the last 90 days of someone's employ is when they are most likely to harvest your information for onward usage.
Yep.
So can you speak to the exit program? What should be in there? And
yeah, I think,
does it apply to big companies or just big companies or small companies too?
Everyone. And I can't tell you the number of big companies that you would think would have this totally squared away, who it's just a soup sandwich. Oftentimes they let HR, regional or city HRs kind of do it their own way. I've seen sometimes a manager will offboard, sometimes an HR person will offboard, sometimes nobody offboards. I've left organizations, 2 major organizations, where nobody offboarded me. I didn't sign anything. I wasn't given an exit interview. Nobody collected anything. So there are problems. And what I suggest is people create a checklist. And in that checklist, it is 100% mandatory. You don't get your final paycheck until you have checked all those boxes. See this person, turn this in. Also, you need to, on that checklist, ask people, have you ever emailed company information to an external domain? Have you ever saved company information to a non-approved cloud storage? If you have, where is it? Where's, the thumb drive you've saved something on? That is your IP that is floating in space that you need to collect back.
Well, you're singing to the choir. We're going to sing loud on this one. I believe this is where companies can save themselves so much heartache. Because how often do we read, and I've written a lot of these, on employee X leaves, takes information with him, including credentials, how to get back in, and all of that could have been at least discussed. I mean, face it, there is a case yesterday where a lady out of the Kansas City FBI was sentenced to almost 4 years in prison. She harvested hundreds of classified documents over a 12-year career and had over 20,000 law enforcement investigatory documents in her home. 20,000. Think about that. And was in telephonic contact with the targets of those investigations, which is kind of heartbreaking because, you see all this work go for naught. But it says to me that in many places, we're looking at bingo cards where people punch the hole, and when I hit a full card, I'm all done, as opposed to having a dynamic program that looks for everything. If somebody just stays in their swim lane, how will you detect their malevolence?
No. But again, that's where the tools come in. Being able to invest in the right tools. There are even new tools out there that are incredible that are using AI and natural language processing technologies to read communications, emails, Slacks, things like that. And they can detect way ahead of time, way left of boom, if you will, when somebody is walking down that critical pathway and they're not doing so well. So being able to invest in technologies will help you mitigate a lot of threats because it will come to you. You'll get things coming to you a lot more. But to kind of our points earlier, when we were talking about having a team and standing it up and all the resources, you also have to have people, and this is a team of people who can sit and literally just triage through all of these alerts. But if you don't have that, imagine you're stuck just relying on walk-ins, if you will, internal referrals who are like, I think Susie's up to something. And those are usually, I found those are like 98% correct, but most people are scared to report. So you're just scratching the surface with those.
Well, sure. And I like to say that our tools tell us what we're seeing today. This is the activities going on. Our data logs tell us what happened. And then when we dig in and look and see if we can find information, it's all historical. That cow has left the barn. The programs are supposed to keep the cow in the barn. So can you speak to that?
I grew up on a ranch, so I like the analogy. Backing up a little bit, keeping that cow in the barn.
Well, my horses have bolted once or twice too, so it's okay.
Keeping that cow in the barn, to me, again, it's that wellness and taking care of people. But it's not just on the company. I really advocate for team members as well. HR is not interacting with people every day. Managers are not doing that as well.
No.
So the people on your team that you work with, instead of joining that Zoom and saying, "Oh, okay, let's get on to business. Next, instead say, "How's it going? Like, how are the kids? I know you're home alone with 3 kids. Like, how's it going?" Talk to people. When you see or sense that someone is struggling with anything, report them, get them help, let the company intervene. It's so important. And one other thing I keep forgetting to say that I don't want to forget to say is talking about these programs in general. It all boils down to marketing and branding. Remember I said earlier about the tone and how you're talking about it? It's marketing and branding. You want to sell it to your employees that they want this and they need this, all in that marketing and branding.
All right. My last question is for entities that are starting out or for those who have a mature program, how do they measure success?
So this is a tough one, especially if you can't get data from those other teams. That's why it was so important in the beginning when I said you have to be able to build relationships. So what I suggest is gather any and all data you can. So any investigations from ER, HR, your investigations team, your IT, your cyber teams. You're looking at any, and before that, even define your scope. Are you just looking at theft of IP? Are you looking at everything under that umbrella? What are you looking at? So you gather that data, you make the pictures pretty so that you can, prove your ROI. And you say, okay, let's say we had 200 investigations, 150 were founded last year. 80 were insider threat related. So then you do training and awareness. You roll that out, and over the year, you keep your metrics. And then the next year, you look at your metrics again. And you should see, with that training and awareness, you should see, a spike where you're having more things reported because now people are aware that they should be reporting. There should be a plateau, and then things should drop off because most people, those unintentional and negligent people, the would-bes, are stopping before they do something stupid. Now the investigations you have should really be kind of those malicious or really egregious. So that's kind of what you should see pattern-wise. So that's why those metrics and that data is so important.
Well, I've always found what is measured is completed. And thus the folks need to embrace it. But don't we run the risk that if we're measuring folks' success by having insider investigations, that they're going to be running around with the hammer and everything looks like a nail?
No, I think it's good because it shows that people are paying attention. When people are reporting stuff, it's good. Like, look, when we worked in government, people had to self-report if there was a security violation.
I think they should do it in private industry too. I mean, it's called integrity.
Trust. Yeah, 100%. So if you can't trust your people to do that, you have a problem. I just think this work that we're talking about requires a shift in culture, pretty much for everyone, which is pretty slow and painful, but you can do it. I have seen it happen. And it's that marketing, the branding, those open conversations, talking about stuff like this in the open. I also suggest using internal case studies. You anonymize it, but say, like, this is happening here. Last year we had this case and this case and this case. So people are like, wow, that is real. Huh. Okay.
Well, I always feel that you should also champion folks doing the right thing. For example, a telephone operator who deflected a social engineering attempt, reported it in, was afraid that they had just hung up the phone on the most senior executive, in the engineering department. But in reality, they were being socially engineered. And in my case, we had that individual call up, actually visit the person, say it wasn't me. Yep. Right. But training is so important. there's a lot of resources for those training on the insider risk management continuum. I understand we're going to make some of those available later. So this has been a great conversation. I want to turn it to the questions now. There's some observations and questions that are available here. So let me take it in the order that they came in from when we were starting here. So Greg Concepcion says, we have great insight on companies relying on system network monitoring or DLP tools to solve their insider problems. What do you recommend for those companies to take a more holistic approach? And what does that look like? I think we touched on it a little bit, saying, you can't just go with the data, but
no,
please.
and I'm glad that you have DLP tools because some companies don't. That's a good first step. Now I would take baby steps. So what that DLP is monitoring, I would then move to either the direction of like NLP, like I was talking about, the natural language processing using AI to monitor communications. People will confide in each other, like the suicidal case I was talking about earlier, where, man, I'm just not feeling well, or I'm so angry. Those terms and things will ping on risk scores, or move in the direction of tools where you are basically pulling everything. There are tools out there also who will use and leverage technologies that you already have, like Workday and things, and it'll integrate and pull all of that in together. And so you will have kind of a one-stop shop based on what you already own. So there's a lot of new stuff out there. You just need to look at it.
Yeah, and you saw a question that came across the ticker on a problem is when senior stakeholders can't even identify what their crown jewels are. Now, I've seen so many instances where crown jewels are being protected ad nauseum, when the reality is they're no longer the crown.
True.
Maybe they're not even a jewel. That the product is, my view is evolution is your greatest ally in protecting intellectual property.
Yeah.
So, but let's speak to this though. That the crown jewels. How does one measure crown jewels? It could be our infrastructure companies, for example. It may not be their IP that's the crown jewel. It might be their product itself that, if it was flawed or had a backdoor, could shut down ecosystems.
That's 100% right. So a lot of people think of crown jewels like Coca-Cola, their secret recipe. I always joke, like, crumble cookies, pink sugar cookie, that's a secret to my heart. But if you look at, like you're saying, like MSPs, right? Managed service providers. If I were a malicious actor and I recruited an insider, let's say an engineer that works there, either wittingly or unwittingly, because we did both, that. And then I could get access to all of those customers, like you're saying, that access is their crown jewel. So you have to look at what you have and what malicious actors can exploit or leverage.
Thanks. That's exactly right. I'm sitting here going, yes. I have nothing to add. Right. Moving on. Greg Concepcion again. Can you comment upon the most recent Teixeira case, who, by the way, just yesterday pled not guilty, and the importance of using data threat intelligence to identify those current or potential employees that are on social media platforms like Discord? What are they posting? What groups are they involved with? Outside looking for embarrassing posts, such as what a younger employee would post on Facebook or Instagram. So should government, such as the FBI, such as the Defense Counterintelligence Security Agency, be doing social monitoring?
Honestly, and this might not be popular, I think to some degree everybody should. And there are companies that do that. And here's my point. When you're looking at things like extremism, and I don't care if it's far right or far left, extremist groups, so affiliation risks. If you see someone like Teixeira who starts posting extremist views or anti-whomever views, you have an insider threat brewing. And like you mentioned earlier, when you're talking about cases like this or active shooters, more often than not, people are posting things on social media at a time. So you're seeing those red flags. The problem is when your organization doesn't know about it, doesn't investigate, or doesn't care, that's when people are allowed to commit that malicious act, whatever it is. So I advocate, in fact, when you're recruiting and interviewing people, do an OSINT social media review. And there's a privacy angle. I'm not saying break in or create a fake account or anything, but if it's open, I don't understand why you wouldn't just take a look to see, does this person represent the culture that we want at our organization?
There are thousands of commercial tools, some of them available for free use. You can put in a user ID and you can say, give it to me. And here it comes. If they've been on Twitter for 10 years, you're getting a 10-year data dump. And then you use your tools to sort through it. So I take your point there. But in this Texeria case, they missed or ignored his behavior. All right, let's just say that. But there was another angle here, and that is, it seems that he exceeded the integrity angle of only accessing that information which you have a need to know, and that there were perhaps not the necessary contextual swim lanes put upon him or others in that role. I had an individual I interviewed recently that said to me, this individual needed to see the road. He didn't need to see in all the vehicles on the road, but he saw in all the vehicles on the road. So what happened to least privileged access? Why does this not exist?
It's not even just that. And it's a shame. Like, you would think if anyone has it locked down, it's the government or the military.
I don't know. Trust me, I'm from the government. Doesn't resonate always.
It used to work. So here's the thing. I don't care if you're private or public. There have to be access controls, role-based access controls, least privilege, whatever you want to do. But when you're not scrubbing your list for terminated employees regularly, when you're not making sure that people are not accessing things they shouldn't, I can't tell you how many cases I've investigated where the document was locked down, but God and country had access to it. That all comes again to that training and awareness. Lock your stuff down. When you create a document, make sure only the people you're sending it to can see it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of steps in access controls that you can take and train and require your enterprise to do, as well as having, like role-based access controls.
There's a number of questions, and they're all similar here, talking about the advent of the AI engine tools, ChatGPT, Bard, and the new Bing. And how do companies regulate that? And how can they mitigate the risk of their PCI, PII, technical research and machinations being part of this large language model corpus, as Samsung articulated to their employees? Yes, you prove the value of the tool, but you just gave our intellectual property to OpenAI, and we want you to not do that. And so they used awareness training and said, we're going to build our own internal one, because you are absolutely right. I thought they did it brilliantly. You're absolutely right. This works, but we need to have it work inside, not outside. Right. So how do you do that?
And we've already seen leaks. We've already seen companies where people are uploading, sensitive data into this. And then I think yesterday or the day before, it came out that it was hacked, right? ChatGPT and these were hacked. Was it 200,000 accounts, 100,000? Anyway, regardless, bottom line, tell your employees, if anything's connected to the internet, you will be hacked, period. Just have that mindset. I think, and
well, that's what everyone's calling zero trust. Don't trust anything, right?
And Carrie, that's a great question. Hi, friend of mine. I think that pre-ChatGPT, which was like yesterday, right? It's hard to come up with metrics and things to compare it to. But I've seen companies lock it down. I've seen companies come out with policies against it. The problem with you should have a policy, but the problem is you have to roll out an awareness campaign so people know you have the policy and why you have the policy, right?
Well, how can you enforce something if someone isn't made aware of it? You need the individual to attest that they took the training. But again, show of hands, how many people have been on the on-demand training and you scroll to the bottom and check the box and move
Yeah.
along, because I don't need that. I got this one hammered.
Yes.
And yes, some modules are being smart and they're saying, you didn't spend 10 seconds on each slide, so go back to go. You're not certified. But others just accept it that the person said he was trained, therefore he is. And then, 6 years later, you're reading in an indictment that company X has this information here attesting that this individual had 2,473 hours of training, and here's all his attestations. But the reality is the individual ignored.
And most people do, frankly. Look,
most people think that nobody's going to notice.
And they don't. That's the problem. I think that with things like AI and ChatGPT, there are a number of steps you can take. Like the most extreme, lock it down. If you're that concerned, lock it down. I've also seen companies with internal tools. Like I know somebody who created one of these tools. It was super cool, called Clippy, where if anyone did a copy to copy paste, it sent an alert, which I think is brilliant, right? You're going to get a million false positives, but it's not always. There are steps, and then that final is that awareness. This is why you can't have it. I think having that internal one where everything else is locked down, and if you want to use it, you're going to use ours. That really is the best process, because you're not going to tell people they can't play with this. Everyone wants to play with it. It's a new shiny thing.
Well, absolutely. I know I am. But I got to tell you, it doesn't write like I do, because I have this very unique vocabulary I use, I guess. We've run out of time. So I want to thank all the viewers for their questions. I also want to thank you for your time. Shawnee Delaney, CEO of Vaillance Group. And for those of you joining us from around the world, these conversations from the inside, we now implore you to go out and have your own conversations. And I'd also like to thank our host, DTech Systems, and their investigative i3 group for sponsoring this Conversations from the Inside. So again, Shawnee, thank you ever so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.